Rising inflation has become quite the global headache as all the big five economies, that is US, China, Japan, Germany, UK, are witnessing a spike in prices in 2022. Now, is inflation impacting demand? That's the question that everyone's looking for, searching for data. And some has come forward today in the Kantar annual survey where they look at a number of parameters, including the impact of consumption of FMCG goods and how it has been affected by inflation. So in India, inflation levels have hit the 7.6% mark. It has been sticky at about 7% for the last few months, but inflation levels have hit that 7% plus mark multiple times in the last 30 months, according to this data by Kantar. K. Ramakrishna, Managing Director, South Asia, Kantar Worldpanel, is joining us now to take us through the findings of what inflation and consumption was like in 2021. Ramki, thank you so much for speaking with us. And just to put this into context, it's just gotten worse in 2022, which is why important to understand how consumers were responding to inflation, which was already inching up in 2021.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me over. What I would like to say is that there is inflation for sure. Though we are not new to it, there is a response from the consumer. But there is a kind of a bipolar behavior if you see from consumers in India. And this bipolarity can be explained in multiple ways. One way is that there are a bunch of consumers who are kind of agnostic to inflation. And these are people who perhaps not had their holidays or not had their eating out occasions enough in the last 2 years, and to that extent they're doing that with a kind of a vengeance. And there is another set of consumers for whom the pandemic and the last 2 years have meant loss of lives, loss of livelihoods, and loss of income, and so on and so forth. And they are watching what they can spend with a lot more care. Add to that the fact that there's been pretty steep inflation in the last few months. Now, when I say steep inflation, from a household perspective, from the FMCG basket perspective, there are a certain set of markers. Like, for example, edible oil is a marker, sugar is a marker. We don't track sugar, but edible oils definitely have seen a sharp increase. And therefore, that makes the homemaker believe that there is a sharp increase in everything that's around. And so therefore, they tend to hover their purchase behavior around this to manage this perceived inflation that is there in across all products. Now, that is one kind of bipolarity that I spoke to you about. There is another kind of bipolarity within the same consumer. There are a certain set of categories which they seem to be fairly indulgent about, and there are a bunch of categories where they are tightening up. What do I mean by that? If you look at the premium end of the market, the growth is pretty good over there. I mean, in fact, the impact of inflation is practically not much, and the premium end is actually galloping. But the mass and the lower ends are struggling a bit. And within that also, if you see, some categories like grooming are doing better than the others. So it continues to be a bipolar mix here. So there is inflation, and the inflation is causing a severe level of stress as far as consumption basket in FMCG is concerned. And the consumer is responding to it in multiple ways. Would you like me to talk about those right now?
No, so let's carry on like a conversation. You talked about certain categories where there is a shift in consumer patterns. And one slide from your presentation that I noticed and I found that interesting was how there was a move towards unbranded options in categories like butter, cheese, cleaning products, etc. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So whenever there is a pressure on the wallet, consumer tends to react in 5 or 6 ways. And one of them is the fact that they increase the share of unbranded in their overall offering. You may well understand that there is no household which can be called as 100% unbranded or 100% branded. They always do a mix. Within branded also, they do a mix of brands, right? So when there is a pressure for price, when there is a pressure on the wallet, they tend to increase the component of unbranded into this mix a little bit wherever it's possible. For example, in edible oils, it's possible. In tea, it's possible. Even in toilet bathroom cleaners, they replace it with, when I say unbranded, even substitutes. Like, for example, instead of using a branded toilet cleaner, they would use acids and things like that, which is a substitute which is in an unbranded form. So that component is definitely increasing in this year as we notice. But another strange thing about behavior among consumers when it comes to unbranded is whenever there is a question of uncertainty, they tend to gravitate towards known brands and branded offerings itself. That happened during the pandemic. As we get out of it and as there is pressure on the wallet, we see the unbranded component going up.
Yeah. Overall, when you talk about the impact, and you tend to suggest in that presentation that the impact of inflation has not been to that extent. Now, are you speaking in the context of 2021, and are you taking into account what we've been seeing since January this year and a heightening of inflation, say April onwards? What is the kind of impact now that this is having?
So we are saying that comment was made in the light of the fact that I spoke to you about earlier, which is the bipolar behavior, which is that there are certain set of categories which are very indulgent, which are also growing. But at the same time, in the domestic regular consumption offerings in personal care, home care, and in foods, there is definitely a distinct tightness that is there. So it's a mix of these two, which is why I'm saying the impact is not the way it is made out to be. And the one is that, like I said, India is not new to inflation. Many of the other countries, the top five economies, for them this is the highest ever inflation that they may have probably seen. But for India, it's quite it's not so new. The fact is that it's coming on the top of a pandemic, and so therefore there is a certain amount of stress, particularly in the middle and lower ends of the market, and not so much in the higher end. Which is why we are saying it is not a uniform impact, and therefore the impact is not as much as one would have thought it would be.
If we delve into rural versus urban kind of demand, what are the trends that you have seen? Are you seeing a move away from non-essential category products, skincare, etc., and a larger concentration on just the basic essentials that you can't do without?
Not really. Actually, in this particular aspect of reaction to the inflation, the rural markets have been behaving much like the urban markets, which means that the unbranded component going up, pack sizes becoming smaller, people buying lesser quantities but more often. All of these aspects have been seen in rural market as much as it has been seen in the urban market. So to that extent, we don't see that kind of a difference of discretionary changes, etc. Like even if you take something like bottled soft drinks, we've seen growth in both rural markets as well as urban markets. So therefore, it is an indulgent product, I would seem to think, and there is a growth there. At the same time, when you look at the other set of kitchen-based products, like let's say edible oils and things like that, there is a tendency to shrink, to move to smaller sizes or move to smaller packs being bought more often and using unbranded as well. So the reactions are pretty uniform across the country.
How persistent do you think this consumer behavior will be, as inflation doesn't seem to be going anywhere? We're not talking about a short-term spike. This seems to be something we have to live with for quite some time now, and we're likely to see the consecutive action from the central bank, etc. Do you think consumer behavior will also adapt accordingly, or the tolerance to inflation is high enough?
Your point is very right in terms of tolerance to inflation, because we've done it multiple times and faced it multiple times. So the reactions that we are showing will continue to be shown, in the sense that this branded unbranded play is a continuum. For example, we are now hearing the beginnings of a noise about edible oil prices dropping. So if that drops to that extent, the unbranded will drop and branded will go up, and things like that will happen. But for that to be reaching the consumer, it's no less than 45 to 60 days, because it's from the manufacturer to the end consumer. There's always a pipeline, and it takes that much time for it to reach. So that reaction will take its time. And there are lots of people, a lot of experts who are talking about the fact that they are seeing some early green shoots as far as rural is concerned. So maybe they're even talking about the fact that the last quarter can be even better, and so on and so forth. So I'm not that sure whether it will be so long term, etc. But having said that, if it is the long term, these are the only actions that are available with the consumer, right? They can play around with what they buy. They can buy a little bit lesser at a time and buy more often. They can add unbranded. They can buy lesser offerings.
Are the small packs working? Because when we speak to FMCG companies, they talk about small packs, they talk about bridge packs, etc. Is all of that working?
Absolutely. So, irrespective of whatever happens to what is put inside the small packs, the rupee 5 and rupee 10 packs continue to be growing. 10 is still the king, and 5 is growing the most. So, definitely those small packs are working.
All right. Thank you so much, Ramki. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.